Hello folks, my name is Leo and welcome to the Disruptive Innovation Festival 2018. The DIF is an online festival of ideas which aims to shift mindsets and inspire action towards a circular economy. And it's this shifting of mindsets that we're going to be focusing on in this session for the next 30 minutes or so, titled Understanding Through Storytelling. I'm really pleased to welcome Gene Bellinger, who's quite a familiar face to the DIF, back onto the platform. Gene, it's great to have you with us.
Great to be here, Leo.
So over the next half an hour or so, Gene will provide us with insights into what it means to be a storyteller of relationships and their implications, and also a recovering systems thinker. But before we get going, a quick reminder to you, the audience watching around the world, to post your comments and questions for Gene. In the chat box just to the right-hand side of this stream, I'll be sniffing out questions from you, and so will my lovely assistant here, just off camera, so that I can put these towards Gene throughout the session and towards the end when we have more of a Q&A style section. So just to kick things off, I mean, the next half an hour or so is all about, we're going to be exploring how we as people go about understanding complex problems that exist in complex interconnected systems, whether it's economic, natural, social, political, or an amalgamation of the above, you name it. So without any further ado, Gene, once again, great to have you here at the DIF once again. It'd be great to understand, why do people struggle to understand complex systems and complex problems? And why do we consistently fail to come up with solutions to these complex problems?
It's a great lead-in, just where I was going. So let me go ahead and get us over to the presentation itself. Okay. So as we look at problems, we typically look at them as something that we really want to go away as quickly as possible so we can get back to whatever else was interesting on our mind, rather than look at them as an opportunity to figure out how to make tomorrow better than today. So typically, we don't develop the level of understanding that we should develop. We end up dealing with symptoms as opposed to real underlying causes, and things tend to get worse rather than better. So over the decades, well, systems thinkers believe that they have a better answer or a better way. And over the decades, as people have asked me what I do, as I begin to tell them, you could see their eyes glaze over, as I'm sure they were asking themselves, why did I ask, and how the hell do I get him to stop? What has happened is that system thinkers, like most disciplines, have developed a world unto their own, believing that they have a better way to approach problem solving. And if you get any number of system thinkers together, whatever the conversation is, before too long, it rolls around to, why isn't systems thinking more broadly adopted within the world? And typically, they never come to the right answer of realizing that they are the problem. System thinkers are the reason that systems thinking is not more broadly adopted in the world. Ask yourself, how much of what I have to say would you be willing to listen to right after I told you you were stupid? If I come to you and tell you that the way that you have learned to think about things all your life is wrong, you should listen to me because I'm going to fix you so you can think better. System thinkers have been selling systems thinking to the world for about 7 decades now, and for the most part, the world isn't buying. And the reason for that is, well, there are actually a number of reasons, but mostly it's because we're selling. In The 1 Minute Salesperson by Spencer Johnson, there's a marvelous quote that says, while almost everyone loves to buy, almost no one likes to be sold. if you recall ever wandering around a store looking at stuff, maybe a department store, and someone comes up to you and says, "May I help you?" The story that goes through your head, whether you realize it or not, is, how can this person be so presumptuous as to believe I need help? While people are very interested in buying, they're typically not very interested in being sold. So this was a realization that really helped, but I was still being part of the problem. I would spend hours or days, sometimes actually months, developing relationship models that I would then, as I came to realize, I would inflict them on other people. I would send this relationship model to someone, and after some period of time, they would send back a message saying, "Oh, that's nice." I later learned what they really wanted to say is, "Why the hell did you send this to me?" Because I never gave them a way to really understand what I thought I understood. I think I was trying to impress people with how smart I was, not realizing that they really didn't care. So in the midst of this, because I approached this initially from the perspective of system dynamics, I thought systems thinking was just a not very grown-up version of system dynamics. And I couldn't understand why there were actually thousands of models and methods that claimed to embrace the systems paradigm. Though thanks to the work of Michael C. Jackson in a book called Systems Thinking, something or other for managers, I learned that the different models and methods are necessary to address the context that you're dealing with. So depending upon whether the system is simple or complex, something that you could envision, that you could design and create, or something that was so complex that the best you could hope for was to understand part of it. And then the participants operating in this context, whether the extent to which they actually had some level of agreement about what it was that the situation was they were trying to deal with, where they're well aligned, possibly aligned in certain situations, and never willing to agree on anything. Within this context, there are things called hard systems thinking and dynamic systems thinking, soft systems thinking, and it migrates to the right. And all this presentation is accessible via the link that's in the DIF. And if you mouse over these presentations, there's little eyes that appear, and you can click on them, and they will display more information about the particular elements in the presentation. And in this one, it talks about a number of the primary approaches for dealing with them. So understanding that there are different approaches that are appropriate for different contexts. And if you're over in this arena, you have to come to some level of understanding so that you can do this. And when you finally figure out how to do this, you might be able to do one of these. The point then was, who can afford the cost or the time to hire 10 specialists every time you want to deal with a problem? It's not possible. It's just unreasonable. So there was a model that I had developed from, well, I sort of recycled it from Aronson about crop damage. And I had developed this model over and over and over again, numerous times. And it has to do with a farmer who is experiencing crop damage. So he applies pesticides to kill the insects, but he has to apply more pesticides every year. And he realizes that the insects have births, which increases the number of insects, which doesn't really completely address why he's having the problem. And then he realizes that the pesticides are creating pesticide immunity, which results in more insects and more crop damage. So he's not doing himself any services. And the pesticides also kill the controlling insects, which no longer eat the crop-eating insects, which lead to crop damage. So he's got another vicious reinforcing cycle. And I developed this model over and over and over again because I think there was something that was trying to get out that I didn't realize. And what I didn't realize was how it was that I went about uncovering the set of relationships. I finally had what I thought was, for me, an aha moment, in that all of systems thinking was distilled down to a single question. And the question was, and? So that from the beginning of this, starting with the situation, I asked, what does this influence? And what influences this? And I continue to ask the same question on an ongoing basis, so that until I find completions or loops, because we've come to understand that feedback causes relationships to have the feedback more control over the way that situations behave than simply direct relationships. The seldom, well, you would be hard pressed to find any real one directional cause and effect relationships. Everything completes, even though some of them are intangible completions, they all complete. So with that awareness, with that aha moment, came one more piece, and that was, I realized that there was a connection between a model and a play. If you go to the play and you sit there and you see the relationships develop between the actors from one act to another, at the end of the play, you leave and you take the story with you, because all of the relationships and things connect to create the story. And when that happened, I realized that when myself and a multitude of other systems thinkers were inflicting their creations on the world, what we were essentially doing is, consider if the playwright walked up to you, handed you the script for the play, and 5 minutes later said, what do you think? There's simply no way that you can comprehend the script for an entire play in 5 minutes. So we inflicted these models, which for us represented a great movement or an advancement on our own understanding of this set of relationships, but we didn't give other people a way to understand them. So what I finally began to do was to develop these relationship models and unfold them as a story, and develop them in such a way that a person could walk through the story, or I could walk through the story and do a video voiceover of it, so a person could watch the video and simply see the relationship model unfold. And this is the one that really brought it home for me, which was done years ago when Scott Fort Monroe and I wrote a book on Insight Maker. So I'm sitting at the table in the morning, I'm having a very pleasant breakfast, and my wife yells down from upstairs, are you going to finally clean up that unsightly growth around the bird feeder today? I'm getting tired of looking at it. And all of a sudden, this whole set of relationships flashes before my eyes as to how I got myself in this terrible predicament. I typically deal with a lot of frustration on an ongoing basis, and it detracts from my pleasant breakfast. Though for the past several days, sitting having breakfast, watching the birds outside on the railing has helped me deal with my frustrations on an ongoing basis. And after this happened for several days, I decided to install a bird feeder. The thought being that the bird feeder will go ahead and attract birds, which increases the birds outside, improving my pleasant breakfast. And the side effect being that the bird feeder actually adds to the attractiveness of the garden, which attracts more birds at the feeder and adds to my pleasant breakfast. Then I realized that the bird feeder requires that I buy bird seed. And if you've looked at the price of bird seed, buying bird seed added to my frustration, as opposed to the other things actually providing me with a more pleasant breakfast or lifestyle. And the birds at the feeder created spillage, which increased the need to buy bird seed. And the bird feeder attracted squirrels, you know, the universal eating machine, which decreased the number of birds at the feeder, which increased the spillage and increased the need to buy bird seed, which added, well, actually the spillage attracted rodents, which increased my frustration because I got to figure out what to do about them. And the spillage promoted the unsightly growth that my wife is complaining about, creating more frustration. And the birds are now pooping all over the railing, and I have to figure out what to do about that. And the question is, what's the real problem that I have to deal with? Well, I could get rid of my wife, and then she wouldn't complain about the unsightly growth. Or I could go ahead and figure out how to redesign the bird feeder so there wasn't spillage, but then I still got to buy bird seed. And you know, there's a lot of things that I could do, though aren't all of them actually symptoms? Where's the real problem in this story? The real problem in this story is me. The problem is me not thinking before I do stuff. It's simply looking at this from a limited perspective of cause and effect, so that the birds outside create a pleasant breakfast, so I want more birds. And as soon as I think I have an answer to my problem, I stop thinking, which seems to be a common problem amongst people. You know, here's the problem, here's the answer, and I never ask about what are the implications of actually applying that solution to the situation. As Sengi said in the fifth discipline, seldom can we ever do just one thing. There are always multiple implications of any action that we take. So this,
so
and
that
then,
was, sorry, Gene. I think that was a really nice, very simple example of how your methodology can be used. So taking a step-by-step tour through the different nodes of a complex system. Though you wouldn't think that deciding on what to do with the growth in a birth underneath a bird feeder is something complicated. It just shows the intricacies and the other things, the other factors that acting or inacting could have on your experience or that system as a whole. And
right.
I mean, that can be applied to, I think that really springs to mind, like the introduction of pesticides, and for example, DDT, and Rachel Carson's A Silent Spring, where this was just a solution to reduce pests, increase yields, but there was never a thought on what impact that would have on the ecosystem, on people, on yields long term. And obviously there's examples not just in nature, but in economics as well. So this is something that has actually not just applied to bird feeders and growth and these simple interactions that we have, but that general rule of considering the relationships and the implications of action or inaction that should be mitigated rather than adapted. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely. And the thing is, often people consider the development of relationship models to be difficult. There's only one question that you need to ask, and that is, and what does this influence, and what influences this? And there's a way to label things so they make sense, and it's relatively easy to figure out. I went to a conference once upon a time, and I was invited to do a 4-hour workshop. And I forgot that it was a 4-hour workshop. So I developed 4 hours worth of presentation material, which is really dumb because even I wouldn't want to sit through it. And at breakfast that morning, I realized that I had to do a 4-hour workshop and I had no material for a workshop. So while I'm finishing my coffee, I developed a workshop. And it turned out to be the workshop that the best one I've ever done in my life. Because I started and I said, okay, there was about 35 people at 5 or 6 different tables. And I said, take out a sheet of paper and someplace on this paper, draw a dot and label it cat. And a couple inches away from this dot, draw another dot and label it mouse. Now draw an arrow from cat to mouse and write chases on the arrow. And then I said, you have now developed your first relationship model, and if you feel faint, you should leave now. And 4 hours were absolutely out of control. And at the end of 4 hours, the entire group was absolutely amazed at what they were capable of doing, because they were developing relationship models more complex than this, and they were presenting them to each other. And they did all of that in 4 hours. So it's not that, I mean, they proved to themselves that it wasn't difficult. And what it was that they found so fascinating was they learned how smart they were. Not how smart I was, but how smart they were in terms of what they really had the capacity to understand about the situations that they dealt with on an ongoing basis in a way that they never thought about them before. It doesn't get any better than that. I look for an opportunity to do that again someday, because I was just having a blast, and so was everybody else. So there's nothing like having a workshop that's absolutely out of control.
And having those attendees getting to the end of that workshop and actually thinking, oh, I actually understand this, and I feel like I've got a good grasp of this system. That's in stark contrast to typically when systems thinkers, as you put it, inflict these models on their network, and they're not facilitating understanding of it through that model. Rather, they're confusing people.
Yeah, I now offer that I actually shy away from talking about systems thinking. I mean, it's like Fight Club. The first rule of systems thinking is don't talk about systems thinking. You find some people that are wrestling with a situation, and you listen to what they're doing and how they're looking at them, and you ask them questions that they didn't think to ask themselves. What I came to realize, in other words, this model is not complete. All right, this is just a subset of all the other relationships that might be relevant in a particular context, where you talked about the way that the pesticide runoff has an impact on the ecosystem and the water supply and the soil and all this stuff. The reason for developing a model is to figure out what you understand. And then the reason for sharing it with someone else is in the hopes that they will ask questions that you didn't think to ask, so that the model can actually the understanding can get to be better than it was before. Though you have to give it to someone else in a way that they can comprehend what you think you understand. A person sits down and they develop a relationship model like this. A lot of what they come to understand is not actually on the paper or in the model. It's like 4 inches above the paper in their head. And it doesn't get communicated by the relationship model itself. And if you had to write, in other words, when I do the videos, I never develop scripts for the video, because it takes days to write a script. The thing is to develop the relationship model, and when you do the video, you walk through it 2 or 3 times, and it's like, I've walked through this presentation 6 times, and I'm talking about all kinds of things at the moment that were not in any of the rehearsals, because what comes out seems to make sense, and trying to communicate it so that people can then go ahead and say, well, did you think about this, and what happens with this? And so that you begin to ponder those things in the hopes of improving the understanding so that when you finally decide to act, you act in a more intelligent fashion, which leads into what I sort of continued to progress along in terms of I spent a lot of years doing failed consulting. It's a painful undertaking in that the way that we go about attempting to address things, take a current situation and a desired situation, which creates a gap. We don't like gap tension, so we seek to understand, develop a strategy, and go through an adoption intended to move the current situation in the direction of the desired situation so the gap goes away. In the process of understanding, more often than not, we end up with what I call scope creep, in that the desired situation gets bigger and better and more difficult to accomplish. And there's a lot of ands in here. If it takes a long period of time to move the current situation in the desired direction of the desired situation and reduce this gap, there's a pressure to settle for less, which causes the desired situation to be diminished. It's like on New Year's Day, my New Year's resolution is I need to lose 50 pounds because I'm way overweight. So during the month of January, for the first 15 days, I'm really gung-ho, and I managed to lose 10 pounds. And now I'm plateaued and I'm not going anywhere. So the pressure to settle for less causes me to desire to be at the weight I'm at so that the situation gap goes away. I mean, the easiest way to solve a problem is to say, I accept the things that are, so I don't have to do anything about it. Part of the difficulty is that we really don't comprehend the complexity and the complicated nature of the things that we deal with, and definitely don't understand the separation of space and time. The old idea about, doesn't matter where I lost my keys, I look for them underneath the lamppost where the light's better. So that because our understanding isn't what it should be, the strategy that we develop and adopt creates unintended consequences. And those unintended consequences typically make the situation worse or create new problems that somebody else has to deal with. What we should be doing is developing a strategy that actually endeavors to avoid unintended consequences so they don't happen. The problem is we've never figured out how to reward people for ensuring that problems don't happen. And then you end up being in a situation where the real objective is to figure out how to solve problems so they stay solved and not create new problems in the process. Is it absolutely attainable? No, but we could be better at it than we are at the moment. And while this particular diagram talks about the nature of the beast, it doesn't talk about the nature of understanding and how to go about it, because it's missing a piece. The piece that's missing is the stakeholders. What seems to be apparent is that if you want to develop a solid understanding and approach to dealing with the situation, all of the relevant stakeholders need to bring their perspective to the puzzle, to the party, so that you can go through all of these other pieces and actually understand the trends and components and interactions and develop a strategy and adoption approach that actually deals with the situation. The way that I came to this is just really bizarre, in that one day I thought about, in all of these consulting gigs that weren't succeeding, about how often do people wash their rental car? Almost never. And the reason is a question of ownership. So if you want to address a situation and have it actually develop a solution and have it implemented in a way that accomplishes what really should be accomplished, it's the stakeholders who have to do it, so that it's appropriate for them to have ownership of the situation that they're trying to deal with. I can't solve your problems. We can figure out answers to deal with the situation, but I can't. And there was, sort of a flawed mindset from the beginning, because I wanted to be the white knight on the horse that came and saved the situation. I don't have any answers. All I have is questions.
Sure. So what you're saying is that this has been the fatal flaw from system thinkers from the onset, is that not only are they creating models that are confusing and they're not explaining, which mean they're hard to understand, but they're also not getting the buy-in from the stakeholders to actually implement change to counteract the problem and rectify the problem.
That's pretty much it. Or that's my perspective on the situation. I don't think I can convince you of anything. The best I can possibly hope for is to provoke thought. Because you change things on an ongoing, you change your mind multiple times every day, right? And you don't mind changing your mind, but you do mind other people trying to change your mind, right? Or so I think. Now, in the midst of all of this storytelling, there's a recent book called Moments by the Heath brothers. They've done a number of books, and I thought they were all marvelous. But this one, Moments, talked about, actually comes to a point of what I just said about I can't change your mind. If I develop a story that presents a clear insight compressed in time and allows you to discover the truth on your own, you can change your mind. I'm not changing your mind. You are. And in the process of all of this, what you have to remember, what I think it's absolutely critical to remember, is it's all connected. Russ Ackoff, one of the giants in the systems arena, commented that you should never improve a part unless it improves the whole. Because whenever we do, we end up back in this situation with unintended consequences. The actual situation gets worse, or we create new problems that we weren't aware of. The other thing that Russ said was, it doesn't make any difference where you initially perceive the problem to be. The real problem is somewhere else. You look at the organization, which has a marvelous selling record for month after month after month, and then for several months, the sales begin to trend downward. So the natural approach is to go beat up on the sales force. Though, if you do the investigation, you may find that the problem exists because the sales force has been doing so well that the production can't keep up with the demand, and the backlog is growing so great that customers aren't willing to wait anymore, and they're going to go buy from somebody else. So it's not sales that's the problem. It's because that sales succeeded without considering the implications of their success. Ricardo Semler, one of my absolute heroes from Semco in Brazil, a small organization that has initiated 30 or 40 new businesses over the last 30 or 40 years with a 41% average return on investment, says, you make this contract with sales to say, all right, we understand you're going to sell 40 widgets next week. And if you sell 40 widgets by Tuesday, take the rest of the week off, because we don't want you to create a problem for the rest of the organization. I mean, it's just absolutely brilliant. And he absolutely understands this model in terms of having the people solve the problems in the organization. And his success is just sort of unmatched. But this particular picture, which I shouldn't have got away from, was developed by, here we go again, the Tao of Physics. Who wrote that? Capra. Capra developed this picture after reading the first part of Brown's Plan B 2.0 or 3.0, realizing that that population growth and poverty are related, and it's related to economic growth and the global capitalism and corporate growth and climate change and soil erosion and depletion of resources and threats to food security and failing states, and it's all connected. As I said, seldom, as Sengi said, seldom can you ever do just one thing. And if you focus on any part of the puzzle without realizing its implications, you're most likely to end up making things worse. So that's sort of what I have to say about storytelling. In this presentation, which the link, I said the link is posted on the DIF. The item, if you mouse over an item, there's little eyes. So there are comments that you can look at and refer to. And some of the elements actually lead to the other presentations that are here. And so, I mean, if you look at the presentation and you click on this, it will take you to that diagram that was presented. So that's all I have to say.
Great. Thank you, Gene. I'm quite amazed that you've gone from looking at a systems model from the why a growth on a bird feeder exists, and then over to this image, the image that you had up just prior, around the potential for the fall of civilization as we know it. And yeah, I do implore people to check that Gene's presentation out through the link on the session page. I just wanted to bring up, touch upon a point that you've made in the last 5 or 10 minutes around unintended consequences. This is a question from the session page. How can you actually avoid unintended consequences? Is that not an oxymoron?
Well, if you avoid it and it doesn't happen, then it's not really a consequence, is it? Though there are ways. Okay. There are ways that things tend to evolve. Okay. If you look at this is a balancing loop, and this is a reinforcing loop. Those two structures, they're like protons and electrons. Everything that we understand about relationship models are composed of balancing loops and reinforcing loops. And well, what was the question? Sorry.
It was on
I got it.
Unintended consequences being an oxymoron.
So there are a bunch of things called systems archetypes, where if you begin with a goal-seeking structure, it has a tendency to evolve into a number of particular structures. So if you look at something and you say, okay, this is what I'm trying to do, and I ask about what are the implications of this? What are the implications of this? I can ferret out the relationships of what the influences are likely to be. If you go back here to the crop damage, I asked myself, okay, I can improve this situation if, rather than controlling insects, suppose I stop spraying pesticides and I promote the development of controlling insects so that they will eat my crop-eating insects. And then I have to ask myself, well, after the controlling insects eat all of my crop-eating insects, what are they going to eat then? Okay, because I'm pretty sure they're going to be hungry. Or the things that aren't on here in terms of, okay, if I apply all this pesticide that goes into the ground, what influence does it have on the soil? And when it rains, where does that runoff go? And I could ruin my own water supply so that the animals on my farm can't drink the water because I poisoned it. So that what you do is you simply continue to look for additional relationships that are relevant. Now, determining relevance is often relatively difficult. So you put things in, you take them out. When you take them out, you don't throw them away. If you put something in and then you take it out, you save it. And you put a note on it as to why you took it out, because somebody's going to ask you 2 days later, why didn't you think about this? And then you've got this whole pile of things over here that you thought about that you took out, that somebody convinces you ought to take and put back in.
Right. So there's a lot of forethought that goes into this. So it's not just developing systems models that you can talk through that are reactionary. It sounds like that people can, by understanding the system that they're referring to and researching, that they can look at potential unintended consequences by understanding and mitigate rather than adapt.
And then, because there's a limit to what I understand, and the extent of my stupidity would fill volumes. That's why I share it with other people to say, what did I miss? What else needs to be here? The whole, like I said, the whole idea of sharing it with someone else is so that they can ask questions that you weren't smart enough to ask. And then the worst thing you can possibly do is argue with them. Right? You should spend time trying to understand why they think it's relevant.
Right. And do you think there's perhaps, I'm cautious of the time, and perhaps we've only got a few more minutes, and there are a couple of questions on the session page. But
I have all day.
Sorry?
I have all day.
Well, perhaps the viewers don't have all day. But there is one question on the session page that I think is quite interesting, because at the DIF we have a real range of audience members, both geographically, both in terms of profession and interests. So for the designers and the teachers potentially watching, what level of knowledge do these people, designers, teachers, entrepreneurs, etc., need to have around systems thinking or understanding relationships and their implications?
You're getting there. You're getting there. The Waters Foundation has proven that they could do it with first graders. Okay. And if you go to their website and you just do a Google search on Waters Foundation, you'll get to their website. They have been working with K through 12 for the last 20 years. And the next generation of people kids that grow up are going to have a tool set that we simply, for the most part, don't have. And it simply is, and what does this influence, and what influences this? And there's maybe 2 or 3 useful guidelines that go along with it. It's 15 minutes.
So if
15 minutes only took me 40 years. Okay.
you've done the hard work, you've done the legwork. So you're kind of, I guess, with all of your experience, and the desired outcome for this, and for the takeaway for the audience members from this 45 minutes, is that in order to understand a system, you don't need to just map out every single node and connection point and then share it far and wide. It's about asking 2 simple questions, as you put it. What does this influence, and what has influenced this? And would you say that is the key nugget of information to take away from this, or perhaps you can put it into some more succinct words?
That was my distillation of thousands of systems thinking approaches to a single word. And to me, that's the biggest epiphany I've had in 40 years. The essence of all of them is and. Right.
Great. I think that's perhaps a fitting time to end this session. And thank you so much. Thank you so much, Gene.
Don't go yet. There's two more pieces here.
Oh, my apologies.
Okay. Well, these are two pieces that you had me put in, but we were rushed. So some of these presentations that you're looking at were created with something called Insight Maker, which is a free web-based tool for doing modeling and simulation. You can find it at insightmaker.com. The other presentation was done with something called Kumu, which you can find at kumu.io, which is free for all of the public presentations that you would care to create. And there are two self-paced learning modules that I created in Kumu, one on storytelling with Kumu that you can walk through and simply look at each one of the elements, and each one has a description and a video that you can watch about that particular element, and one about storytelling with Insight Maker. So, and I went back after Leo and I talked, and those two links are right here in the presentation.
Great. Okay. That's really be very, very useful for the audience to not only look through your presentation and go at their own pace, but also explore those two platforms that you utilize to be able to tell stories and explore their implications, rather than just mapping out systems models that nobody understands. And we can see you now. So thank you very, very much, Gene. Okay. So what we will do is provide all of that information on the session page, and not just within that platform, so that those watching live and those watching on catch up can explore at their own will.
You're also welcome to give them my email address if you like.
Great, fantastic. So as we heard, Gene, you've been working on this. You've been working in the area of systems thinking and developing how to make it, I guess, more palatable to a wider audience, and to hopefully facilitate the uptake in that kind of thinking of complex systems more generally. So it's great to hear that you're willing to pass on that knowledge, not just through a DIF session, but through direct contact. And we'll pop that on the session page as well for the audience.
I feel better now, believing that I'm actually part of the solution as opposed to being part of the problem.
At the time of being, perhaps back in the day when you did describe yourself as a systems thinker rather than a recovering systems thinker, did you consider yourself part of the solution or part of the problem then?
No, I still thought I was part of the solution. Okay, I always thought I was part of the solution, and the takeaway is probably that I may be still part of the problem, just not yet realized.
And only through learning can we and time can we tell.
What I offer you is trial and learning. I hate the phrase trial and error, because we shy away from error. There are so many things that if we don't do something, we won't learn enough to get better. So talk about it as trial and learning. Go make some mistakes. Just make sure the mistakes are above the waterline so the boat doesn't sink.
Wise words. Yeah. Great. Thank you, Gene. And I'm not going to, I think that's everything. And I haven't forgot anything towards the end there. So my apologies about that. But it was great to have you on once again. It was a really, really insightful 3/4 of an hour. And of course, so to the audience at home, look at the session page, look out for the descriptions of the Insight Maker and Kumu as the platforms that that Gene had just talked through, as well as his general presentation there that you can deep dive into and look at the more granular presentations around each of the nodes that we touched upon. And of course, we'll put Gene's contact details on there so that you can reach out to him and ask him questions like I have today. And it was, once again, thank you very much, Gene, for joining us.
Well, the one addition. Don't be afraid of asking questions. I'm not looking for work. I'm retired. And I'd like to say that way. All right. I tell people that now that I'm retired, I only work 80 hours a week and everything is marvelous. And I'm not looking for work. Okay.
You're retired and yet you work 80 hours a week.
Well, it's not actually work. It's an obsession.
Great. Well, I'm thankfully that the DIF has been part of your 80 hours this week. It's been great to have you on once again.
Okay. Bye, Leo.
Bye. I just wanted to say before we do leave to the online audience that while it may be the end of this session, over at thinkdiff.co and in the schedule, you'll see that there's over 100 other pieces of content that will be released over the next 2.5, 3 weeks in forms of live on airs like this one, pre-recorded high quality films that we and others have curated, podcasts, and really cool speakers in the live studio in this very building 2 floors above me. So do check out the schedule at thinkdiff.co. One that was released today, or actually 3 sessions that were released today, was the DIF Learner Journey, which is an introduction to circular economy to those that are interested or want to fine-tune their understanding of circular economy. And of course, one of the topics of the DIF this year is thinking in systems. Though Gene perhaps has an embargo up on the phrase systems thinking, and abides by the Fight Club rule for systems thinking. I'm sure there are other sessions, in fact, that go into systems thinking and applied systems thinking in more detail. So just look for thinking in systems as a topic in the schedule, and watch and engage away for the next 2.5 weeks. So that's it from me and from Gene. Until next time, goodbye, folks.